And with that, I'd like to hand over to Jana.
So that's interesting because we've just had so many different ideas around Mayday. And the one that's just come up as you were talking now is the distress call for ships at sea that are about to sink. And it just occurs to me that, maybe what we're going to do in this hour together is answer that human distress call. Because I see so many of us trying so hard to turn things around right now, and our human fallibility just keeps tripping us up. And yeah, there's no one answer to that, but what I'm going to share with you now is something that's really helped a lot in my world. I work in self-directed education. So I work in an environment where young people are completely equal with adults, and even, for example, participate in hire and fire decisions, budget spend decisions. They basically run the facility. Well, we all run it together as equals. And we needed ways to deal with conflict and discipline. And I started studying things like NVC and how to talk so kids will listen, and listen so kids will talk, and all of these parent effectiveness training. And then came a time where I had to put together facilitator training packages because we couldn't find anything that was suitable as a training package for self-directed education facilitators. And initially, I simply recommended to everybody that they do some kind of alternative communication training. And initially, that's what we all did. We sort of internally trained around the other aspects of SDE, and people went off and studied, with many of the resources that I've just mentioned. But more and more, especially as I extended my training offerings internationally, I got more and more feedback from people that they had been there and done that, and it hadn't worked for them in one way or another. And I started to wonder why and look at that. And what I found, I've now developed into something I call horizontal communication, which is not in competition with any of those methods, but it contextualizes them and complements them, hopefully in a way that helps us keep afloat more easily. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to basically do an information dump. Some of you might find this very easy to digest. Others might need some time to digest it. So I've prepared a bit of a slide presentation with key points on it so that it'll hopefully be easier to go over the recording and look through stuff if there's things that you want to recap to come at it at a more human pace, because I do tend to cram a lot into a short space of time. So without further ado, I'm going to now figure out how to share my screen. And okay, so that's it, horizontal communication, and no, need slide 2, there we go. So, no, bear with me. I don't claim to be tech savvy, I just claim to be, I think I pressed play, huh? There we go. Okay, so Stephen Porges, if you've heard of him, came up with something called polyvagal theory. And I can't go into that in detail. I'm going to give you the absolute nutshell that we really need. We already know that human beings, when we feel unsafe and threatened, we can go into fight or into flight. And he also did a lot of work around the fact that we can go into freeze or shut down, which is kind of like a collapse state. So when we feel threatened, those really are the options that we go into. On the other hand, when we feel safe, we go into a social engagement mode. And when we're trying to communicate with people, it's going to make an enormous difference which mode we are in and which mode they are in. And what Porges found is that we literally hear differently depending on which we're in. So if we are feeling unsafe, our ears actually adjust so that we can hear the high and the low ends of the frequency range. So for example, pitched for screams, for fires crackling, for thunder, for rumbling of animals stampeding, for animals growling. And we zone out of that middle range that is where the human voice lives. And we literally don't hear as well on a physical level. When we are feeling safe and engaged, our ears are actually pitched to hear human speech, and we comprehend better. And figuratively, of course, it's the same. When we expect threat and attack, we interpret what we hear from that framework of expecting threat and attack. When we feel safe, we're more likely to hear what the other person is really trying to tell us. So for me, I see that as correlating with two different kinds of culture or approach. When we feel unsafe and our survival is in danger, or we interpret that we are in some way endangered or threatened, the natural form of interaction there I call vertical. So vertical cultures are typical for invaders. You can see there that a vertical style of interaction is literally a chain of command. You know, the guy at the top tells, so let's say maybe the king tells the general below him what to do, who gives orders to the captain, who gives orders to the soldier. Or, you know, in a patriarchal family, the father gives orders to the mother, gives orders to the children who go kick the dog. So that's what we have all grown up with. And it's fascinating because I've spoken to so many people from so many religious and cultural backgrounds, and I keep hearing the same thing. Oh no, but in my tradition, and they start talking about vertical culture. And my conclusion is that, you know, the horizontal cultures that were more mutual have been colonized, have been invaded, have been taken over. And invaders don't only change history, they also change the culture. And secondly, you know, whenever we are dealing with survival and threat, vertical culture is going to be the natural culture that's likely to emerge. So that's the first thing to realize, is that we pretty much guaranteed grew up learning vertical ways of being. When we feel safe, we are more able to go into a horizontal form of interaction, where we can work with cooperation, where we feel bonded with each other. The problem is, it isn't just about how we feel, it's also what skills we have. And given that we've been enculturated vertically, where we start falling into distress and tripping up is when we try to do horizontal using vertical skills and not realizing that we're stuck in vertical habits. And this is where the tragedy comes, where people are trying to connect and they don't know why it's going wrong. They're trying to solve conflict and it gets worse. I've seen so many relationships around me deteriorating, between parents and children, between partners, between countries. So that's where it's important to start becoming aware of this. So briefly going through this, vertical characteristics: there's a chain of command, obedience is valued, and kindness is optional. Very briefly, in horizontal, we could see obedience as a form of collapse in the face of threat when we feel that we don't have any other options. It's not necessarily a positive thing. Respect is reinterpreted as deference. The word respect is used, but it's meant, what is meant is that you politely submit to a superior person with more status or power, even if you despise them. We all compete for higher places on the chain through violence, through moral high grounding, and through games like Who's Right. Or on the other hand, of course, we can go into martyrdom and get a moral high ground by going to a lower point in the chain, apparently, which kind of gives us a moral high ground point in the chain at the top, but it's all vertical positions. There's always a loser for every winner. Somebody must be wrong every time somebody else is right. And there's an illusion of safety for those at the top. They look like they're in a good position, but of course it's precarious because there's always somebody wanting to take your position. Horizontal, on the other hand, there's a connection between equals. We aim for listening, understanding, and compassion. Respect is interpreted as due regard for the feelings, needs, and rights of others. Deference is not important since no one is seen as superior. Cooperation and collaboration replace competition, and mutual understanding is more important than being right. So even if we agree to disagree, the question is, how is our connection doing? So win-win creative solutions are the aim, and everyone's unique perspective helps us make a fuller picture. And there's genuine safety for everyone, because even if we are the odd one out, we are still included and we are not threatened. So that's what we're aiming for. And just very, very briefly, some of the key influences behind this approach include Carl Rogers, Marshall Rosenberg, Thomas Gordon, Maslish and Faber, Ross Greene, and Byron Katie. So essentially, some things are easier to use as tools, like a hammer is designed to be used as a tool. Whereas, of course, you can use a hammer as a weapon. On the other hand, a gun is designed as a weapon, and you could try using it as a hammer. The dangerous thing would be the chance of shooting yourself in the foot. And that's literally what we do when we try to use vertical tools horizontally. So we've decided we're going to be these wonderful, compassionate people who go for win-win solutions, and we do our darndest to do that, not realizing we're using vertical tools and we don't know why it backfires. And the bottom line, what I realized that led to developing this sort of articulation of communication is that anything can be weaponized. People were showing me how they could take these perfectly constructed NVC sentences, these I statements with all of the feelings and needs in the right place, and use it to try and manipulate somebody into getting down lower on the chain than them. And so weaponizing, we mean using something in a vertical way for vertical ends. So what it comes down to is, as much as these communication tools are hugely useful, very, very valuable, it's down to how we use them. And that's about honesty with ourselves and mindfulness, which is easier said than done. It's not easy to break our old habits, especially since they were bred into us through, for most of us, our family interactions. Some of us were lucky, through all of us who went to school. And right now, the first step is to become aware that they are there, to actually see the air that we are breathing, see the water that we're swimming in, and realize that it's vertical. It's difficult because vertical tells a story about absolute good and bad, and only perfect is good enough. And shame is very, very powerful. My working definition of shame is when we feel enormous pressure to manage something that we cannot yet manage. And it's an excruciating feeling. I should be able to do better and I can't. Whether that's about bladder control, whether it's about keeping our temper, whether, whatever it may be. The vertical story is that we ought to be perfect. And demanding perfection of the self or others ensures that we stay in vertical mode. Horizontal sees that there is no perfect, which is a hugely shameful thing to admit if you're stuck in vertical. But horizontal approaches have compassion for ourselves and compassion for others. We acknowledge that being human is hard and always messy, which is also why we need so much love and kindness. Especially recently, I've seen so much pain coming from people just starting from the assumption that the other person ought not to have whatever limitations, or feeling that we ourselves ought not to have these limitations. And the fact is, this is planet Earth and I haven't seen perfect yet. So one of the most common ways that this manifests in our culture is through a story we tell, which has been called the Karpman drama triangle. And this is a habit that's, again, hard to break. In the Karpman drama triangle, there's only three things that you can be. You can be the persecutor, you can be the rescuer, or you can be the victim. So whenever I am unhappy or something is going wrong, I start to look for this pattern and see, who do we blame? Who is the persecutor? Who's the person causing all the trouble? Who's the victim that I must rescue or save? And who am I going to be? I'm going to be the rescuer. And the thing is that these positions move. You cannot actually sit in one position, but we all like to think that we're sitting in one position or two positions, because everybody's very comfortable over here. Everybody wants to see themselves as the rescuer and the victim. Nobody wants to see themselves as the persecutor, except of course under certain circumstances, especially when you really give up and become cynical. But as we learn in screenwriting and constructing fiction, your villain only becomes plausible if they are the hero of their own story, because that is how humanity works. Your persecutor is the hero in their own story, and if you really speak to a persecutor, you will find someone who believes they are a victim or a rescuer. So we all play this little dance, not realizing we're playing it because it's very, very convincing, and it can get very, very subtle. And it's a vertical dance, and it relies on us staying in vertical mode. The moment that we go into horizontal mode, we actually can't sustain this dance, and it falls apart, and we see it for the imposition that it actually is. Another thing that creates a lot of trouble for us is the difference between high and low context communication. So this is something that's been articulated mainly by business people trying to make deals between East and West. So you get your American businessman going across to India or Japan and thinking that he's made this wonderful deal, and coming back and finding that he has no deal and not knowing why. So there's a lot of people trying to train Western business people in high context communication. So for example, if you say to an Indian businessman, you know, this is my proposal, what do you think, are you on board? And he'll go, yes, 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 lovely, wonderful. He's being very polite to you and helping you save face, and you are supposed to be able to tell from his body language, his tone of voice, the subtext and everything else, all of these other little things that he hasn't said and what didn't happen. You're supposed to know that he is saying, nope, sorry, no deal. But you don't pick it up, because you're from this low context culture where you're counting on the fact that, you know, it's all about the words and agreements and signing on the line, and you don't know what went wrong, and vice versa. So, I mean, the lovely domestic example that I've seen used a lot is the wife comes into the kitchen and says, why isn't the rice cooked? And the husband says, but you asked me to put it in the steamer. You didn't say anything about turning it on. And she's like, ah, yeah. So the thing that I've realized is that the high and low context thing actually isn't just about cultures on that meta level. It's really about our interactions all the time. Even within one individual, there are things where I rely more on context and expecting people to understand my context. And there's other times when I expect people to take my literal words exactly at face value. And I'm seeing mismatches between these all the time. So for example, with trigger words that are very, very loaded for one person, for another person for whom they don't have that context uses that trigger word, but the person who's responding assumes all of that context and reacts very, very strongly. The other person doesn't understand what the big deal is, because they've got completely different levels of high and low context around that word, for example. So we keep assuming, we act according to our own assumptions about what matters in a specific situation. We assume that it's the high context stuff that matters and you should have picked this up, or we assume that it's the low context that matters and you should take my words, you know, I did not say this. Whereas from your interpretation with all of the rest of the contextual stuff, that is exactly what I said. So there's so much projection going on as people try to make sense with each other, which is why I say every interaction is a cross-cultural interaction. You can never assume that somebody else is coming from the same place as me. And of course, beware text, because text is also a place where it's very, very easy for one person to assume that the words should be taken literally, another person to assume that the context matters, and of course nobody can even see the context. So all sorts of misunderstandings, that this was sarcasm or satire or a question, and we're just blind sometimes to what else is going on. So very briefly, this is how I train horizontal communication now, is with a NEES acronym. The concept of NEES being, for me, you know, when we're standing vertical, we're standing tall, and we're always ready to top down, or else we're rolling on our backs, being submissive. And those are really the only options. Whereas when we're on our knees, we can actually firstly be humble. Humility is a word I love. Again, in the West, it's become synonymous in a way with shame, which is really a pity, because it just means to know that I don't know and to have an open mind. So when I'm on my knees, I can be humble, and I can also get down and scrub the floor. It also came to mind for me because, you know, working so much with people who are a lot shorter than I am, I often need to get on my knees to see eye to eye. So yeah, I liked knees. And the K stands for know your options. So once we know that there is horizontal and there is vertical and there is high context and there is low context and there is the Karpman drama triangle and, you know, all of these things, it becomes easier to be honest with myself about where I'm actually at. So it's, again, not possible to be permanently, perfectly horizontal. I think maybe 10 people on the planet can do it. The rest of us are going to have these lovely low vibrational times of being vertical, especially when we feel under threat. And we need to know our options. We can speak in that moment and try and repair the damage later, or trust that it won't be too much and just forgive ourselves. We can try to calm ourselves or postpone. We can try to shift over to horizontal. But mindfulness at that point is hugely useful. The more that we can cultivate an awareness of which mode am I in, the more likely we are to be able to do what it is we want to do. So just knowing that I'm trying to be horizontal, but without the skills of horizontal, trying to use my vertical skills, can also give me a heads up that I might need to go slowly, as they say in Afrikaans here, stadig oor die klippe, means slowly over the stones, when I don't have a lot of horizontal dexterity yet. So the first step is to stop and know one's options. The next step, and of course these steps are artificially separated. In real life they can be quite mixed in, but it makes a nice checklist to see what did I leave out, because usually what I left out will explain why the thing went wrong. So my next step is to neutrally observe and reality check. I describe what is going on in a way that everybody would agree with. So one example I love using is, you know, if you walk into a kitchen, and let's say that I'm a very organized person who likes my kitchen just so, and I walk into a kitchen where a group of children have been baking, then a not neutral observation on the one end of the scale would be something like, this kitchen is an absolute mess. It's a total disaster zone. What the heck happened here? On the exact opposite of that would be, oh, this kitchen is a delight. It looks like an explosion of joy. A neutral observation would be something like, I see flour on the floor. I see dough all over the sink. I see dirty dishes on the stove. and I see some splatters on the ceiling. Everybody can actually reality check that and look and see, is that so? Is there flour on the floor? Are there splatters on the ceiling? And just doing that can be a hugely useful step, because we often don't realize how much value judgment and assumption and projection we pack into just our first observation, and how we load our description of a thing in order to try and get people onto our side or to see our perspective, and push our own agenda, which is going to take us straight into vertical, where we're competing for whose agenda is going to end up on top. Then the next step is to empathize, really discover and reality check the other's feelings and needs. So I need to open myself to being able to put myself in their shoes and feel it from their side. Which again, you know, we are not taught this. We didn't grow up doing this. Most of us didn't receive much empathy, so it's also quite difficult to give. But this isn't only in order to make them feel safe and relaxed. It does that. But again, it can be weaponized. So it really needs to be done from a place of humility, that I am really trying to find out what it is I don't know. What would cause you to do the thing that you did? Why does your behavior make sense to you? If I can actually understand why you did what you did and what needs and feelings you have that are behind that, very often the problem is already solved. The next step is to express my own feelings and needs, and obviously I have to know what they are. And this is also very difficult if we've grown up vertically, because we weren't raised to have feelings or needs or to be able to articulate them. So this is often a journey of self-discovery to become able to do this. And it's also truly important to recognize the need for both of these steps. Again, because the vertical story would be, you know, when we first try to get out of vertical into horizontal, we tend to just flip the vertical the other way up. So instead of dominating you, you know, I will now empathize with you. And so instead of dominating, expressing myself, I will now empathize with you and not express myself and play underdog and leave my own needs and feelings out of this thing, which is not horizontal. It's simply another position of vertical. So for horizontal, we have to go to multi-partiality. Everybody matters. And that includes me. So when I've empathized with you and reality checked with you that I have understood you, I now need to offer my own vulnerability so you can see to the inside of me. Because otherwise you're not going to understand why the heck I have the perspective I do. And again, I can't just make that assumption that you should know. You don't. So I have to let you in. And again, that's going to take vulnerability, which takes safety. And this is a bit of a chicken and egg thing, is that horizontal builds safety. And the more safety you build, the more you can do it. And from there, when you've got all of that in place, then solutions are really easy to co-create. And the critical thing to realize at that step is that there's a huge difference between a solution and a need. We tend to confuse them. We tend to think, I need you to wash the pots right now. And that's a proposed solution. That's an agenda. What I need is I need clean pots in order to be able to cook. And behind that, what I need is to be able to feed the children. But there are actually many, many ways we could come up with to feed the children that might not involve you washing the pots right now. When I'm in vertical, I'm not going to see that, because I'm just going to have my, you need to wash the pots right now. Or else I need to suffer that you didn't wash the pots right now, and I'll have to wash the pots right now. Whereas when we've gone through this process, we can actually now both at the table feeling safe, feeling connected, we can play, we can collaborate, we can be creative, we can come up with something. So that's in a very, very quick condensation. what that is all about. And then wrapping up, because I want to leave a bit of time for questions, I strongly recommend Byron Katie's work. It's very, very simple, and it's about reality checking. It's a tool for reality checking. Whenever I have a thought, I can ask, like, for example, you should have washed the pots. Is it true that you should have washed the pots? Well, yes, you agreed to wash the pots, and I need you to wash the pots. So of course it's true you should have washed the pots. Can I be 100% certain it is true? Well, no. If you're going to kind of look at that higher level, I can't be 100% certain that you should have washed the pots, because maybe, possibly, there's some scenario in which it would be better and you shouldn't have washed the pots. So I can loosen my attachment to the thought. How do I react when I think the thought that you should have washed the pots? I'm furious with you. I feel distressed. I no longer want to cook. I want to have a fight instead. Who would I be without that thought? It's hard to imagine who I'd be without the thought. That in itself could be good. Maybe I wouldn't be so distressed. Maybe I'd be able to think more creatively. Maybe I wouldn't be angry with you, which means that we could partner on a solution. And then the final thing you do is you don't try and change your thinking, because trying to change ourselves is like trying to change somebody else. It tends to cause resistance. We play, we get playful, and we turn it around. You shouldn't have washed the pots. Let me find evidence for that. Yeah, you shouldn't have washed the pots, because what you were doing was actually probably more fulfilling. You were watching something that made you laugh, and that might matter more in these times. Or you shouldn't have washed the pots because, hey, now I've got a perfect excuse for us to get pizza, which actually I didn't feel like cooking. So you can play with turning it around and looking for evidence until you find that your attachment to a solution or perspective is loosening, which doesn't mean that you can't solve it, which doesn't mean that you can't hold to what it is that does need to happen. It just means that you're coming at it with a very, very different attitude. So my suggestion for groups where we have to resolve conflicts is, what if every key participant completes this worksheet? Just some context there. This worksheet is a judge your neighbor worksheet, where you start out by listing all your complaints against the person and what it is that they should be doing differently. And what if everybody completed that worksheet for as many people as are relevant before entering a session of mediation or conflict resolution? What a difference we might see. So that's my suggestion. Okay, thank you. And just to be absolutely clear, I do recommend exploring NVC and the other resources. I'm not aiming to compete with them, but to contextualize and complement them. But I also do offer a kind of a simplified training in horizontal communication if you know people who might need that. And now I'm going to stop sharing. In fact, no, you know what? I'm just going to go back to there for just one moment and let that sit there for 1 minute. And yeah, questions.